Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to write resilient and refactor-friendly component tests in Angular. So let's get started. I'm on the official site of Angular, and this page has few examples on how to write tests for your component. We have a component called light switch component, and this component has a button and then one message just below the button. And on the component class, we have this state, which is either true or false. We have click event, and then finally we have message. So whenever user clicks on the button, we will change the state of the is on property. So this is exactly similar to the toggle functionality. And on the message, we just show the same state of the toggle. So when we click for the first time, our message will be the light is on. If we click again on the same button, the message would be the light is off, and so on. Let me also show you the UI of this component. So this will look something like this. When you click, it will be off. When I click again, it will be on, and so on. So how can we write a test for this kind of component? Here, there is an example of how we should write the test for this kind of component. And so this test basically first creates an instance of the class that we want to test. And we are using new keyword to create the new instance. And then we make our assertion, right? By default, it's false. So we are expecting is on property, which is this to be false for the first time. And when we call this click method, then our state of is on property will be true. That's why it's true. And if again we call this function, it will be false. Don't worry about with context function. This is basically for the purpose of debugging. Let's say if you write some test and then you find some errors, this kind of context will help you to find the exact location where the test is failing. And also, if we look below, we are again creating instance of the same class, and we are checking the message on this test. For the first time, it will be off, and if the component is clicked, our message will have on. This is how the test is written for this component. In my opinion, there are few problems with this approach, and I'm going to talk about those things by writing few code. First thing I did was I exactly copied the same code that I showed earlier on the component, and also on the spec file I copied the exact same code. And when I ran the test, everything passed. There are no issues. But the minute I started to change the internal implementation, for example, if I want to change this property to toggle and save the file, our component should still work, right? So if we look on the browser, even after changing the name of the state, there has not been any issues with our component. It works exactly the same way. But there are some issues with our test. And also on the console here is complaining that is on state is no longer available. So this is not resilient and refactor friendly. Change in the internal implementation of your class should not affect your testing. The only time your test should break is when the actual behavior of the component is not working as expected. For example, when you click on the button, for some reason, the toggle message is not displaying on the UI as expected. That's the bug, and only at that time your component test should break. But it doesn't make sense to get this kind of errors when the actual behavior of component has not changed and working as expected on the UI. And the end user doesn't care about the internal implementation as well. They only care about the component that they see on the browser. If they interact with the component and if it works, then there are no issues. So if you write the test which relies on this kind of internal implementation, this kind of test is very brittle, and you have to change whenever you change on your component. There are few ways to solve this problem. One is to test your component against the DOM or document object model rather than the internal implementation. So I'm going to write new test for the same component. Let me undo my code again here. I'm going to copy a few lines of code from another window. So nothing has changed on the component. I just changed a few lines of code on the spec file. So on my test, I'm using testbed, which is provided by Angular. And testbed is basically a suite of different helper functions or APIs that will help you to write tests in Angular. So up until now, I just created a fixture. And the reason why we need fixture is because when we are testing our component against the DOM, we want to first get access to this button, and also we want to get access to span, and then we can write our test. I'm going to demo all those things now step by step. So after we have access to fixture, the next thing I want to do is I want to test the click behavior. So now I'm going to copy and paste some code after this line. So if you look closely here, I added one test here, and the first thing I want to get is the toggle button. And the way to get the toggle button is we have the fixture and we have this thing called debug element. So all of these are provided by Angular. If we look on the debug element, it's basically the root element. And then we now want to query to get the button. We want to get access to this element. So there is this static class called by, and it provides a bunch of utility functions. And one of them is called CSS. And with the help of CSS, we can target which element we want to target within this component. Here I'm saying, hey, give me the element which matches with the tag name called button, which is this one. On the second one, I'm saying, hey, give me the element which has a tag name called span. After I get access to these two selectors, now I want to trigger the click event. So earlier we were saying component.clicked, but now we are triggering this event differently. I'm not calling click function directly. I'm not testing the internal implementation of this component. I'm just calling the DOM event. And after I call the click event, the next thing I want to do is I need to make sure that I call detect changes method. Angular expects this function to be called so that it can bind the proper value on the template. If you don't write this code, then you will not see the expected result on your template. So make sure you always call this function. There are also ways to automatically call this function, but you have to write some config on the testbed. But I prefer to call this function manually and explicitly. So after this line of code, the next thing I want to do is the message that's displayed on the UI is as expected. For example, when I click on the button, the message should be the light is on. So in this case, I'm saying the text content, which is this, to contain on. I'm not comparing the whole message. If you like to compare everything, you can also compare everything, but I'm just testing this state here to contain on. And again, if I click the button, I need to call this detect change to make sure that the binding is done correctly on the template. And then on the assertion, now the message will have off rather than on. So if I save this file and check here, everything is passing. And the main advantage of this approach is even though there is some change on the internal implementation like we did before. So for example, let me go back to my previous code. If I replace everything here, this won't affect your component test. Everything looks good and everything works as expected. So this kind of test is refactor friendly. When I say refactor, if you refactor anything on the component and that does not impact the behavior of the component, those kind of changes should not impact the tests. And also this is resilient. When I say resilient, this kind of changes will not break your test. And I think it's very important to have this kind of test. Maybe it doesn't have much value on small code base, but if you have large code base, then you have to be very careful when you write your test. So far, this code looks good, but there are still few drawbacks of this approach, and we are going to solve those kind of problems as well. Let me try to add one more button. So I'm going to copy this button here and then try to add some more new button here. So now, when I added this new button, will our test still pass? No, it will fail. And the reason for that is the way we are selecting the button. I mean, this line of code is now pointing to this button. By default, when we query with button tag, this will return the first button that it will find within this component. And the first occurrence of button is this line of code. So if we try to select by only giving the name of the tag, this kind of tests are brittle. And we should not use this kind of selector when we are writing our test. How can we make this kind of test better? So instead of just saying, hey, give me the tag which matches with the button, we have to be a bit more specific. For example, we can think about writing some unique property, something like this. And if you want to target this button, I can say name. So instead of saying, hey, give me by button, I can say, hey, give me the tag called button, which has name called click. So it's pretty simple. We just need to write the attribute here. So after you make these changes, your components should work. It looks like there is some issue. Let me try to debug this one more time. Oh, I forgot to save this file. Let me save the file, and everything looks good. Everything is passing. So my main point here is down the road, if you want to add new feature on top of your existing feature, unless there is some specific region, your test should not break. So with this approach, no matter how many buttons you add at the very top, your test will always pass. There is one more approach to make your selectors resilient. I'm going to revert this first. So instead of targeting your element with the name of the attribute, you can also think about targeting this element with the help of the text content. So I can say, hey, give me the button which has name called new button, something like that. I think that's also another approach to find the element that you are looking for. But for that, you need to create some kind of helper function. For example, I already have one helper function with me. So let me copy and paste at the very top. I have a function called getSelectorByText. And the first argument that I'm going to provide to this function is the node element. In my case, I'll be passing the root element of this component. And the second parameter is the text that we want to look for. So in my case, if I do new button and then pass the root of this component, I should be expecting to get this button. So instead of doing this approach, I remove that line and copy and paste. If you look closely here, I'm passing the debug element and native element. So this returns the main top, this tag. And here I'm just passing click me. So in my case, I'm passing this text because I want to get access to this button. And this toggle button will return this button. And I can do the same thing for message as well, but for the timing, I'm going to keep this as it is. But we can apply the same approach for message as well. And here we are getting some issue because this might be undefined as well. So to handle that scenario, I'm going to add this operator, and this will handle our null use case scenario as well. I'm going to add question mark here as well. And so instead of using trigger event handler, this was provided by Angular, but this doesn't exist on our native JavaScript. So to fix this problem, I can simply call click, and I can do the same thing here as well. And if I save this, everything looks good. Nothing has changed. Right? So this is another approach to uniquely select the selector that you are looking for. So to summarize, you can either add some custom attributes, something like this, to uniquely identify this element, or you can also even rely on the text within that element that you are targeting for. But for the second approach, you have to create the helper function, something like this. That's pretty much it. I hope this video helps. If you like my video, please share and subscribe to my channel. That will help a lot to grow my channel. Thank you very much. And up until then, see you on the next video. Bye bye.